I'm Mike Saltzman. I'm on the board of CABIA and the CABIA Foundation, and I've been honored to work with Tom Manzo for several years on communications and several other projects. We're joined today as panelists by Tom Manzo, who's the founder of the California Business and Industrial Alliance. We're joined as well by Rob Lapsley, who's president of the California Business Roundtable. And then we're also joined by Lamont Washington, who is an employee at Coast to Coast Computer Products, to give us the employee perspective. Charlize Bazzello and I are handling media for the event today. As a quick housekeeping note, if you have questions during the event, feel free to submit them. And then we should have some time at the end after the speakers and a brief video preview as well for to answer some Q&A. The authors, Christine Baker and Len Welsh, could not join us today, but they're willing and eager to answer any questions about their study. And so if you either email those to us or put them in the comments, we'll be sure to get you a response from the authors promptly for your stories. So with that, I want to start by introducing and turning it over to Tom Manzo, who, as I said, founded the California Business and Industrial Alliance several years ago. And then more recently helped found the CABIA Foundation. Tom, why don't you give us an overview of what you do and tell us why this study is so important?
Sure. Thank you, Mike. So I'm Tom Manzo, and I'm founder of the California Business and Industrial Alliance. We formed this trade association in late 2017, and it was because the manufacturing facility I was running got hit with a PAGA claim, and it was over late lunches and misclassified safety incentives, which cost us about $1 million. I was outraged over it and decided to do something about it. And since then, our trade group has probably about 150 members, and we work with close to 24 trade associations, working with people like Rob from the California Business Roundtable, which has been a big, huge help for us in our efforts. So what we did is we hear a lot of stories on a regular basis. We talk to members, and we talk to people who are victims of PAGA. We talk to business owners, human resource professionals, people, general managers that are running the company. So we hear a lot of the stories, and we tried legislatively. We didn't succeed. We are suing the state of California over PAGA. That's going to be a long process, but we're still doing it. And during the last legislative session, they were trying to pass a PAGA reform bill, and quite frankly, it didn't make it. It didn't even get voted on. And one of the reasons is because there is a report that's out there. It's from UCLA, and they call it the PAGA Hero Law. And they're claiming that PAGA is great for employees, it keeps the bad employers in line, and it's great for the state because it's providing a lot of funding. That report came out in March of 2020 or prior to that, and they're using that report to say that this law is good. Legislators have this report. And to show you how bad and how effective this report is, last year Senator Portantino tried passing a PAGA reform bill where people that worked remotely, worked from home, couldn't file a PAGA lawsuit for late lunches or missed breaks. And the bill didn't even get voted on. It didn't even make it out of committee. And the California Labor Federation said it is going to weaken the labor laws. I don't know how somebody working from home is going to miss their lunch or their meal break, but apparently this is the impact that it's had. But we knew when the report first came out that we needed to combat it, and we needed to come up with our own report. Because the report said business owners are complaining, but there's no empirical evidence. So we said, we'll get that empirical evidence. And we created CABIA Foundation, and the first thing our foundation is doing is creating the first ever PAGA study. So business groups, people have data and information that they can take to their legislators, and we can use it for a number of things, potentially an initiative if we want to go that route. This will be a big help. It'll assist us in our lawsuit, actually. So the more data we can get out there, the better off all of us are, because people need to know the truth and the real story of what PAGA is doing.
Tom, can you, before we turn to Rob too, can you just give us a couple of highlights? I think what was notable about this study, and again, Christine Baker, who was one of the top regulators under Governor Brown, and then Len Welsh, who was one of the top labor regulators under Governor Schwarzenegger, came at this project without any strings attached. I mean, they were really kind of given an open book to say, to get the data from the state, all the data the state had available, to explore what kind of conclusions that data would lend to it. And then they came back to the foundation with their findings. Can you give us just a couple of quick highlights on what those findings are?
Let's say that the three biggest highlights of the findings, which I think a lot of us knew, but now we have the data to back that up. And by the way, you know, Christine Baker was the former head of the DIR, and Len Welsh in charge of Cal OSHA. So when we were thinking and considering about who could do this report, we felt they were probably the most qualified in the state, and they would be able to get that data from the state and make it where it was something everybody could look at. And here's what it really boils down to. Employees, if they went to the state opposed to PAGA, would actually get twice as much money. Employers, if they went to the state opposed to going through the attorneys, would pay half as much, and these cases would end up getting settled in half the amount of time. So that's a huge, huge difference, I think, for everybody. So anybody that's claiming that PAGA is helpful and this is to help the employees, they definitely do not have their facts straight, especially once this report is released.
Thanks, Tom. And we're going to turn to Rob here now. One of the things I just wanted to flag for those on the call is that in the media release you got, to better visualize this data on a local level, what the foundation has done is not just put out a report with top-level conclusions from Ms. Baker and Mr. Welsh, but also made it so that you can go county by county in the state and compare, for a typical PAGA case, how much the attorneys are getting versus how much a typical plaintiff is getting. And the divide on that is usually, I think in Tom's op-ed for the OC Register, I think the typical take for the attorneys in Orange County was somewhere in the $400,000 range from a PAGA court case, whereas the typical take for the plaintiffs was about $5,000 or $6,000. So we're talking about a pretty big difference. I want to turn now to Rob Lapsley. Rob and the California Business Roundtable have been great friends of CABIA. Rob and his organization in many ways need no introduction. They've shown great leadership on this and many other issues, and we're honored to have him with us today. Rob, can you talk to us a little bit about the business importance of this issue and getting these reforms right?
Good morning, everyone. Michael, thank you. Most importantly, Tom, thank you, your members, CABIA, for the laser-focused leadership on this issue. It's obviously, ladies and gentlemen, been a top issue for the business community statewide, really, as it's grown since 2003 when this law was first passed. You know, I think it's interesting to note today, because of the dynamics that we're in, that this law was signed by Gray Davis, you know, right after he was recalled. I'll let you draw your own conclusions on some of the politics of this, but I can tell you unequivocally of the impact of such a bad policy has put California in a position from our business community to be where no other state is. No other states have this kind of system. Now, obviously, business supports the rights of workers. We've been crystal clear about that, but we support the rights of workers where we can work in a fair and impartial system like under LWDA, who are tasked to be able to take care of these kinds of claims, and not in a system where we're held hostage by attorneys that are not overseen by anybody and are throwing out, you know, frivolous claims under the current PAGA system. So Tom has led on the first real data and insight to show the abuses that the business community has been experiencing over these many years. And the worst cases are the ones that you don't even hear about because they get settled out of court because of the fear that businesses have about being dragged into some of these cases publicly. I can tell you unequivocally right now that there's a Southern California case that's not being talked about. That's $150 million in claims, which is going to have a devastating impact on that company if they get, the wrong judge or the wrong court. So what this means for the business community is that we are going to stand together with PAGA to be able to move forward on taking this data to the policymakers, to the governor, to show them the real challenges that we face and continue to build the efforts for reform. It's a statewide business community effort to be able to reform this with PAGA's leadership. So whether it's in the legislature, which we hope, and there's many bills this year to do that, or whether it has to be outside the legislature and figure out the path with the voters. But either way, we have to show that employees are not getting a fair return when they have a fair claim. And lastly, I want to be clear that the business community supported efforts just a couple of years ago with Jerry Brown to augment LWDA, to augment the staff to be able to take care of these things so they didn't have to push out these claims to the attorneys. So it was over $9 million in additional funding for staff, which shows that if things are managed properly, we don't need this system at all. So that is part of the education effort moving forward that we have to do with policymakers, that we'll be doing with under PAGA's leadership, and that we'll be bringing together the entire statewide business community to be able to do this. And then the last point, and it is, think about what this means, and Tom just said it, and Michael said it, as we shift to a paradigm of new work because of the pandemic. Telecommuting now is going to be the paradigm shift of innovation for employers moving forward, because you are going to see, as employers have adopted this model, that if we don't modernize our employment laws to keep pace with what is happening, in the workplace today, then we are going to continue to have challenges for keeping employers in this state, because they can easily then move to other states that have much greater flexibility. And PAGA is a huge part of that. We've asked the governor for help with this already. It poses a liability for employers under telecommuting, as Michael and Tom said. And we have got to be able to show employers throughout the state that the state recognizes that they have to modernize these laws to ensure that we can continue to meet the change in what's happening, in our statewide business community. So Tom, thank you again, and we look forward to continuing the work with your leadership on this.
Rob, thanks for those remarks. And I think to emphasize a point that Rob just made there too, is that the real standout finding of this study has very little to do with employers complaining, and it's really all about outcomes that are not working for employees, that employees would be better off, and not just employers. And so I think it's a good situation where I think the interests of the business community and the interests of the people who work in the business community, employees, are very much aligned. And we're honored to be joined here today by Lamont Washington, who works for Coast to Coast Computer Products. We came to know Lamont and his team a few years ago when the owner of Coast to Coast, Rick Rusin, invited us into his business for a day to hear their PAGA story, and to hear how they were harmed by a PAGA lawsuit. And Lamont made some comments that day in a video that we filmed that's on the CABIA website. And we just wanted Lamont to share his thoughts real quick on how a PAGA lawsuit negatively affected him from an employee perspective. So Lamont, go ahead. Thanks for your time.
All right. Well, thank you again, Michael and Tom and Chelsea. And I want to thank all you guys for taking the time out of your day, small part of your day, to hear me share a little bit of my story. I've been an employee for Coast to Coast Computer Products for coming in on 14 years. And when I started here, the atmosphere was like very fun, and it was exciting to come in, and we had a lot of energy and flexibility and freedom, to the point where I used to be able to go take a little time to go to my son's plays and his performances and his jogathons at school. Maybe take my wife out to lunch here and there. And even sometimes be able to go tend to my mom, who's elderly and she has health ailments, to check on my mom. And because of the PAGA, it kind of took away that flexibility and freedom that we once had over here at Coast to Coast in our culture. And again, the environment and the atmosphere was very energetic. And that's tend to have gone away. We used to be able to high five and do things like that. And with the PAGA, it's kind of turned that environment around for us as well. Not to mention the freedom of the financial aspect of it. We used to be able to come in early, leave a little bit late, be in full commission. That's very powerful. And with the PAGA, it also affected that freedom and flexibility there financially to even make more, to support our families. And so the PAGA just negatively affected not just me, but others around here in that same type of way. I used to, being in commission, I used to feel like this was my business in a sense. And now I just feel like just the average employee. It's taken away a lot of that excitement and that zeal. So that's just a little bit of what I wanted to share as far as how it negatively affected me over here at Coast to Coast. And thank you for letting me share, Michael.
Lamont, thank you for joining us. And I want to follow up on Lamont's remarks there by asking Charlize to share a documentary, very short, only 2 minutes, that CABIA is premiering today to try and put a personal face on stories like Lamont's and take this issue of PAGA, an acronym that many people may not even understand what it means, and give a quick explainer as to what it means for the state. So we'll show that, and then we'll turn to some brief Q&A before wrapping up in about 10 minutes here.
PAGA is out of control. It has harmed my business and thousands of other businesses, which actually harms California.
It's drained me financially, it's drained me personally.
It completely will wipe out our company. There is no survival.
PAGA, which stands for the Private Attorneys General Act, is a law only in California that allows aggrieved employees to sue their bosses for any labor law violation there is. All of these lawsuits are based on things like late lunches. They're based on a bonus that was given that wasn't calculated correctly into an overtime, possibly rounding issues. It's a very confusing law.
If an employee doesn't get their lunch break by the 5th hour, then you need to pay them an hour extra pay, even if it's 1 minute into the 5th hour, hence the PAGA lawsuit, this 90 million plus lawsuit.
I let employees take breaks whenever they want, but in the state, you have to clock out for your breaks and record it. They asked for $3.7 million in violations. My business doesn't make that much revenue in 2 years.
It's cost so far, just in my attorney's fees, over $200,000. It has hurt my employees. They can't get raises. I'm not hiring, and I'm laying people off to pay for the lawsuit.
It's more about a lawyer getting paid on the other side than it is about actually protecting employees. It actually has deterred me from opening other locations in California.
I love this state. I want to be in this state. I don't want to be driven out. Why not make it a place that really values employers who have so much at stake and yet are made to feel criminal when they try to do everything right?
This is a nonpartisan issue. Anybody that has an employee is being hurt by this law. They're being taken advantage of. The trial attorneys are the ones that are benefiting from it. Okay, so we have a question from Jennifer O'Connell, and she wants to know, how will the new report help counter these PAGA claims? So I don't believe that they will help counter any of the PAGA claims at the moment. You know, I think that the new report is just going to explain that this really is not working. And one other note on the report that's really important to know is that the state right now in the Labor Workforce Development Agency account has about $113 million for PAGA. So if they have $113 million, they could obviously hire more people and the state could start to do their job. Because a lot of these claims, you know, they're perpetuated by the attorneys. The attorneys are actively pursuing and seeking employees. So that's what ends up happening, and I think you have a lot more cases because of that. But unfortunately, I don't think it's going to help in the near term or the short term. But thank you for your question, Jennifer. Yeah, and one other point on the study too, which is pretty interesting. Over the last 5 years, the number of actual cases. So there's you know, last year there was close to 7,000 or over 7,000 PAGA notices, but there was only about 2,200 cases. So you have this void. Well, what happens to the PAGA notices? What were they settled behind closed doors? Did they drop PAGA and just turn it into a pure class action, wage and hour? So those are some of the unanswered things. But the bottom line is the cases actually have been steady over the last 5 years. But the settlement amounts have increased by a factor of 6 over a period of 5 years. That's astounding. So obviously, that's another huge problem.
Hey, Tom, we just, and I apologize, it wouldn't be a Zoom event without some sort of technical difficulties. We had a question, Tom, about the contrast between the harm for some of these, the actual harm caused by some of these violations of the labor code and the attendant penalties and liability associated with them. I mean, I think one that you've mentioned frequently is that it's an actual violation of the state labor code to have a bathroom that's the wrong temperature, but we've seen massive legal liability over things like typos on pay stubs. I know we're running a little short on time here, Tom, but can you touch a little bit on how the disconnect between the liability under PAGA versus the actual harm faced by the employee?
Well, you know, on the penalty phase, and this was part of our lawsuit, and unfortunately, what happens is if you decide to take the case the distance and you have a PAGA lawsuit and you decide, hey, I'm going to fight it, I'm going to go all the way to the court, the judge could adjust those penalties. So it makes it really difficult to say that these penalties are excessive because the judge has the ability to change that. And obviously somebody was really thinking when they wrote this law, because that put almost a trap in there. But just to give you a quick insight on these penalties, and this is an actual case that was also cited in our complaint from Starbucks, and it was over de minimis time. It was an employee who actually would clock out, and then he would shut off the lights, set the alarm, lock the door behind him, walk to the parking lot. And he said he was shorted at least 2 minutes a day. Well, when they did the timing of everything, it was about 30 seconds a day. He would have been owed about $22 for the year, $22 short for the year. The penalties and fines on that particular case were $67,500 per person. And at that time, they had 32 employees at that particular Starbucks store. So 67,000, those fines are way excessive. And again, that's what makes it heinous, is because these attorneys are going to stack as many of these penalties as they can to raise that main number up. And the study is proving that. The study is saying in the last 5 years, cases have went up 6-fold. That's the reason why.
Thanks, Tom.
Looks like we have another question. If labor organizations continue to fight any helpful legislation like Portantino's bill, how do we get this through the legislators? Attorney and labor lobbyists will set up a wall around PAGA to protect their interests. Rob, you want to take this one?
Sure. So obviously that's the challenge that confronts the entire statewide business community. So we have to be able to organize now at a district level with employers who are employing the constituents of the legislators to band together to show them exactly what the impact of this is. And there's no question that the labor lobbyists will build that wall. But we also then have to take the information from this study to be able to inform those legislators of exactly how employees are getting shortchanged under PAGA itself. So that's the great irony of this. And that's the information that they don't have. And then lastly, we need to be able to go to the governor's office. And the governor needs to weigh in now on this as well. He understands, he's a businessman who, as he has said, at practically in every press conference, he's a small businessman. And his businesses are absolutely at threat of PAGA claims. And I've heard, but can't verify yet, that they have had PAGA claims as well. And so if that being the case, the governor understands this, and it's time to do something about it. So obviously politics will kind of back full circle with its own recall politics, if you will, this year. But maybe that also provides some opportunity. That's what is in front of us together, united, to move forward. And we look forward to working with Tom on that.
I can confirm that the governor has gotten 3 PAGA notices for his businesses, and they're Plump Jack Brands is the name of it. I did see a question about the shakedown letters. Are we seeing more of those? And yeah, there's a lot out there, but the problem, the problem, Gwen, is this. People are afraid to provide those letters. I've been asking for those letters over and over again. When Lenny Mendonca was in charge of the GoBiz at the time, and I showed him some letters that I had and said, what are you going to do to change this? He owns a brewery, and he actually got one of those and paid one of those. So, unfortunately, the government's aware of it. When are they going to do something about it? I don't know. If anybody on this press release has any of these letters, please send them to us. This is going to be part of our next phase of the study. We promise we'll keep them confidential. We will not release anybody's name or anything on this, but we need to know, like a sampling of, hey, we got 200 letters. Each of these letters averaged, $50,000 or $40,000. This is the data we need. So if anybody can provide us that, we please ask you for that.
And
Thanks,
Michael,
Tom.
I agree with that. That's sorry to
go ahead.
The business community as a whole, again, the chamber is working on this. Obviously, new car dealers, everybody is working on this. But we're putting out the word statewide as well to try and be able to reflect that to get them into Tom.
Tom, Rob, Lamont, we thank you all for your time today. We thank everyone that joined this press conference today. You should all have copies of the study and the takeaway in your inboxes. We'll also be distributing the video documentary afterwards. Please follow up directly with Charlize with any questions you might have, either for one of the panelists or one of the study authors. And we look forward to being in touch with you again soon as we continue this important fight to fix and reform this harmful law. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Thanks.
Principal findings. Point 1. Available data indicate that the current average payment a worker receives from a PAGA case decided by the Labor and Workforce Development Agency, or LWDA, is 95% greater than for a PAGA case filed with the court. $4,100 from an LWDA decided case versus $2,100 from a court case. Point 2. Even though workers are receiving higher awards from LWDA decided cases, employers are paying out 60% less per award. On average, employers pay $504,000 per LWDA decided case, and $1,232,000 per PAGA court case. Point 3. LWDA decided cases do not award attorneys' fees, which contributes significantly to the huge difference in award amounts between LWDA decided cases and PAGA court cases. Attorneys who file PAGA cases with the court are compensated with fees that represent 33% or more of the worker's total recovery, coming to more than $405,000 per case on average. Point 4. Delays in obtaining recoveries are substantial. Indications are that workers wait an average of 15 months for their awards from LWDA decided cases and nearly 2 years for their awards from PAGA court cases. Point 5. Letters of intent to file a lawsuit are used to frighten employers into settling before a PAGA lawsuit is filed. These settlements are not reviewed by or reported to either LWDA or the courts. For this reason, the public will never have information on what workers receive, what the workers' lawyers receive, or what employers pay in connection with these settlements. Most importantly, there is nothing to ensure that workers have received what they are entitled to from these settlements. Point 6. Funding reserves that are accessible by LWDA and the agencies under its authority exist in the amount of more than $113 million. These funds could serve to fund the creation of an alternative administrative framework. Point 7. There is a disturbing pattern that has appeared over the last 5 years, showing that while the number of PAGA cases filed has remained relatively flat on average, the amount of employer penalties has increased by a factor of 6, which likely means the amount of employer payouts overall has similarly increased. Point 8. The recent signing into law of AB 5 will likely dramatically expand actions threatened or filed pursuant to PAGA. Point 9. A PAGA exemption was legislated in 2019 for one sector of the economy, unionized construction. This is tantamount to union recognition that the PAGA process does not produce desirable outcomes, and employee redress for wage and hour violations can be improved with an alternative structure.